What's the most outrageous thing your partner did that made you leave them instantly? I saw his note listing all the money I owed him over our 8-year relationship. I was stunned. Some of it was school fees he'd lent me when he asked me to move continents for him, and some were for holidays and other shared expenses. He never told me he was keeping track or that he expected any of it back. Apparently, "we'll figure it out" really meant we shared expenses like roommates, and he expected every dollar back eventually. Despite making a lot more than me and splitting living costs 50-50, I paid it all back and left. Too bad I didn't charge him for emotional labor, moving expenses, or even go after his super. Story 2. I supported him for nearly 5 years. I did the cooking and cleaning, worked full-time, and completed my degree, all while he stayed home to finish his degree and received a small pension. He did nothing to help around the house. One day, he told me he had saved enough for a property deposit. Then he made it clear that he did not want my name on the title, though I would still be expected to contribute to his mortgage. In that moment, I realized I was not an equal in the relationship. I was just a convenience. It wasn't just the years of doing everything while he did nothing. It was knowing he let me carry that weight while quietly saving for himself. There was no mutual respect. There was absolutely no way I could marry this man. I promptly moved out, lived in a share house for a while, and now I own my own apartment, where my cat and I live our best lives. Story 3. We were living together, and were very poor. One of our favorite bands, Big Sugar, came to town. We talked about going, but it wasn't in the budget. Friday night rolled around, and he started getting dressed to go out with the guys. "Where are you off to?" I asked him. Big Sugar." "What?" "We talked about this and decided we couldn't afford to go." And he said, "Oh, we can't, but I can." That was it. I just upped and left. Story 4. She asked me to bring her home fries after work, so I stopped at McDonald's and picked up 2 large fries. When I walked in, she took the bag from me, opened it, pulled out the fries, and threw them in the trash right in front of me. I was stunned and asked what was wrong. "I wanted frozen fries," she said, then asked why I even came over. That moment made me think back on other incidents I had brushed off. I realized that no matter what I did, she would resent me and never be satisfied. Story 5. I found a text he sent to his friends saying he saw no future with me. We had been together for 4 years, and he had recently convinced me to leave my high-paying job and move to a small town for his career. Story 6. The egg story, as my friends call it now. She spent the night at my place and woke up early the next morning saying she was hungry. I told her I had just bought half a dozen eggs in the fridge and that I'd be down in a minute. I live alone and hardly ever have food, usually just booze. But this time, I had eggs. Perfect timing, right? I walked downstairs to find her on the couch, eating and watching TV. I asked if mine were on the stove. She said, "No, I didn't cook you any." I said, "It's okay, I can make my own." She replied, "I cooked them all." "All 6 eggs?" I asked. "Yup, I only eat egg whites, so I cooked all 6. I was furious. I went upstairs, got dressed, and left. She asked, "Where are you going?" I said, "To get myself breakfast, I suppose." I went to a nice restaurant and had a big, relaxing breakfast by myself. Took my time too. Later, I got a text asking if I was coming home soon. No apology. Nothing. That's the moment I knew. Story 7. 3 years into the relationship, we were living together and decided to spend our summer vacation apart to give each other some space. I needed time alone, as I rarely had it. She went for 5 weeks to Portugal, her mother's home country. I trusted her, loved her, and was even preparing myself to ask for her hand at the end of the year. However, her bipolar disorder complicated things. During her trip, we rarely spoke. She went a whole day without messaging, sparking panic within her family. It turned out her medication was affecting her sleep. While in her hometown, she met a guy friend she really connected with. When she finally returned, I was excited, counting the days to see her. I picked her up from the bus station, only to be met with a huge frown. No joy at all at seeing me. I tried to lighten her mood, but it was useless. For an entire month, she was depressed because everything was perfect back there. She called and texted that guy every day. There was nothing I could do to help her, but he could. Eventually, she said casually, "I have never been that happy with someone in my entire life." After that, she began to doubt our relationship. It crushed me, especially on top of my own depression. It pulled me into a dark place that took me a whole year to climb out of. When she said that, I understood that I would never make her that happy, that I was replaceable. My sense of a future with her disappeared in an instant. I should have left then, but I couldn't. I struggled with depressive thoughts throughout the whole summer. Then came her doubts and her words. We finally broke up 2 weeks ago. I had no strength to leave until now. The emotional attachment was strong. I am in a better mental place now, but I am still afraid of being alone again. Story 8. I realized that everything he said was just excuses to procrastinate endlessly. Then, after being together for a while and him consistently claiming to be apolitical, I guess because he knew how liberal I am and we'd been good friends since we were teenagers when he was quite liberal, I saw the truth. He was a misogynistic, dishonest person. We shared a bedroom, and the second room was half mine, my craft room and half his computer room. I had a Cricut cutting machine, and he set up an account for me on his desktop so I could use it, since my old computer had died and I couldn't get another at the time. One day, I needed to use the computer. I moved the mouse to wake it up, and 4chan popped up. He'd been in the middle of typing a comment about how disgusting women are, saying we are only good for banging, housework, and having children. He even bragged about gaslighting me, giving multiple examples. I have several chronic illnesses, and he wrote about the joy he got from gaslighting me about my symptoms. He had never said anything remotely like this to me before, but I said nothing. I started packing my things right then and left within the week. Story 9. I was already married by this point, but the night I told her I wanted a divorce was triggered by her going to the movies with a coworker who was married, and whose wife was so disgusted by the messages she saw between them that she forbade him from speaking with my wife. I would later learn that neat gem from another coworker who liked me and didn't approve of what was going on. Yeah, I know. I could have asked to see the texts, but I didn't want to read them. I stayed with her through the pandemic until she mentioned going to the movies with that same guy. When I asked, his wife is cool with that? She replied, we don't care. And for some reason, it clicked right then and there. I felt her response was probably meant to preempt whatever I might say. I told her I wasn't comfortable with her going with him, knowing full well I had already made up my mind, and that she had too. Her response, I can live with that. My first thought was, well, I hope you can pay the bills with that. I told her I wanted a divorce while she was doing her makeup for their hangout at the movies, and I couldn't bring myself to feel any sympathy for her tears. Honestly, I was surprised to see them. I didn't feel anything at that point. I was done and pretty numb. I expected to be sad for longer, but the next day I called my brother and went over to his house to hang out and talk about what had happened. He noticed it first. Awa, there you are. You're back. I was nervous as hell, a little worried, but I felt overwhelmingly light. Light in mood, movement, speech, all of it. Our entire relationship had been fraught with boundary-crossing crap like this. My brothers had tried to tell me that they didn't like what the relationship was doing to me, but I stayed anyway, thinking I had to learn to just put up with certain things. I didn't know a damn thing. Throughout the next year, she tried talking to me several times to make it work, and I just didn't give a crap. Genuinely didn't give a shit. She seemed like a complete stranger to me. Things weren't even going particularly well for me, but I was so much happier. It bothered her, and she admitted it. I replied, I can live with that. Sorry, the comment is so long. This post hit me personally, especially since I'm now with someone who's so much better for me. It's night and day. Don't let yourself suffer with someone who can't even listen when you're excited about something. Don't stay with someone who makes you feel like everything you are is not okay yet still needs you. Don't stay with someone who doesn't respect you or who lacks the will or wherewithal to consider you in the decisions they make. Don't stay with someone who considers you second best. Don't stay with someone who isn't willing to treat you the way you treat them. Story 10. I spent several hours making and frosting his birthday cake, a beautifully crafted replica of the cake Hagrid gives Harry in the Sorcerer's Stone. We brought it to my parents' house the next day so we could enjoy it together. We had a normal day hanging out and swimming in my parents' pool. I had no idea he had been drinking so much. On the car ride home, we got into a fight over something trivial, and it escalated. He screamed at me and slammed on the brakes. I had half of the large double-layer chocolate cake in my lap. It flew out of my hands and smashed onto my dog who was resting on the floorboard. He continued screaming at me, slapped me, and then kicked me out of the car in the middle of nowhere. Eventually, he came back to get me, and we went home. When we got back, I was the one who cleaned up the cake all over his car and gave my poor dog a bath. I should have left him then, but I didn't. It took another year before I finally broke up with him. I was with him for 8.5 years. We started dating when I was 23 and he was almost 30. He wasn't a bad boyfriend all the time. I did love him, but for someone 6.5 years older than me, he was immature and had anger issues. I've been much happier since leaving him in August. I've lost 20 pounds and am now dating a much kinder man who is only 1 year older than me. He makes me feel like we have a real partnership and empowers me in ways my ex never did. He's gentle, and he makes me feel truly loved and seen. It's eye-opening to see the differences between them. Story 11. She was supposed to finish work at 2 in the morning. I woke up in the middle of a nasty sleet storm at 5:30, and she still wasn't home. I called her, no answer. I called the woman she had worked with that night, who said she had been drinking at the bar after closing, which wasn't unusual. Naturally, I started worrying that she had gotten into an accident in the awful weather, but no. When I finally reached her, after driving around her route home to make sure she hadn't crashed, she was laughing hysterically and asking why I was so worried. She said she was just hanging out with a coworker. I drove to his house to pick her up and she was absolutely hammered, with zero regard for the fact that I'd been terrified something had happened. It was around 7 in the morning by then. I let her sleep until about 3 in the afternoon, then packed my things and left. Story 12. We went to his relative's wedding at an outdoor venue. While I was talking with another guest, I glanced over and saw him throwing my purse onto the floor with the utmost disgust and revulsion. He also rolled his eyes in contempt when the relative asked us to take a photo together and refused to translate something a guest said to me, even though it wasn't my native language. After the ceremony, he asked what plans I had made for us. I told him I didn't think we should spend time together since he was clearly unhappy. He called me stupid and boring and stormed off. I asked his brother to help me get to the closest station to go home. He leaped into the car, ignored me as I sobbed, and played with his brother's child while refusing to answer why I was crying. I ran as soon as the door could open, cleared all his things out of the flat as soon as I got home, and dumped him. He tried for months to get me back, and I'll never understand why, since he clearly hated me by the end. I'll never forget his lovely mother saying she dreamed of our wedding, and in my head, I was screaming, "Dead God, no." I had been wanting to break up for a while, but found it hard because his family was wonderful. It sounds silly, but I was young and without family. Everything happens for a reason. I met my husband 3 weeks later, and it's been 7 years since we've been so happy together. Story 13. When I broke down and told him I was exhausted from always doing all the housework and that he needed to learn how to cook, clean, grocery shop, and plan dates, I said I would help him learn how to do all of that. On top of this, I was working 70 hours a week while he was a part-time student at university with only 2 contact hours a week. Despite this, I always ended up doing all the chores. He said he felt he went above and beyond for me, driving me to my job once a week, ordering takeaway when I was too burnt out from work to cook, and sometimes calling me pretty, and that if it was such a big issue, I would have to break up with him. I did, and he was shocked and distraught that I could come to that decision. In short, I was so exhausted that I couldn't imagine spending the rest of my life like that. At the time, I wanted kids, and the thought of having children with someone like him was distressing. Story 14. I don't even remember what the argument was about anymore, but the moment he grabbed me by the throat in the car was it. There's no going back from that and no way to move forward. I quietly made my exit plans, called off the engagement, and left. It was the first escalation, and I have no doubt it would have worsened over the years if I had stayed. Story 15. He decided he didn't want a girlfriend anymore. He wanted someone to mommy him. I'm not exaggerating. He would constantly criticize me for not being maternal enough. He insisted it wasn't some kind of inappropriate thing, but that he genuinely needed me to nurture him like a mother would, for the sake of our relationship. That meant I had to change my entire personality, obey his every whim, clean up after him, remind him to shower, and of course still be intimate with him. I did this for about a year. We were together for 4 years total until it finally clicked that he was never going to go back to being the person he was before. No matter what I changed about myself, I was just enabling his strange, unhealthy behavior. Story 16. When we got into a fight, he punched a hole in the closet door, then went to the liquor store and took his anger out on the wrong person, who hit him over the back of the head with a bottle and gave him a skull fracture. He was completely insufferable. He refused treatment from the ambulance, refused to let me take him to the emergency room, and refused a second ambulance visit. He had a severe headache for days, and after about 6 days, he finally let me take him to the ER, where he learned he had a skull fracture. After he was discharged, he needed 24/7 observation for 2 weeks, and I had a job and a child, so I couldn't do that. I called his mom, who came to take him. When he returned, I had all of his things packed in his van, ready for him to move out. I did not play. Story 17. The night before I was going to propose, she called me in tears and said, "I need you to know that if you ask me to marry you, I will have to say no." That was only the beginning of the realization. Over the next week, she told me that years earlier she had been abducted and essayed, and as a result she could not have children, even though she wanted them. She had a great deal of unprocessed trauma. Whether because of that or for other reasons, she admitted that although she valued our friendship, she couldn't bring herself to feel the kind of attraction needed for a marriage. She had wanted to tell me sooner but could never find the right moment or the courage. With the possibility of marriage suddenly approaching, everything became overwhelming for her. For 3 months, I held out hope that counseling would fix things, or that she'd have a sudden change of heart like in the movies. Sadly, she just wasn't ready. One day, while I was cooking soup and talking to her on the phone, she told me she hoped we could stay friends forever, but didn't see us ever marrying. I told her that I couldn't be around her and not stay in love, so it was better for us to go our separate ways. As I said it, I realized the soup had been boiling over for quite some time. I think that was the moment I accepted. It was the end. I hung up the phone and wept for an hour. It felt as if an immense mosaic had been shaken to the floor by an earthquake. Countless expectations and dreams shattered, each fragment reflecting a future now lost. I understood immediately that rebuilding, if it ever happened, would take time, and my image of life would never quite resemble the one I had imagined. 15 years later, I am glad to say I am married. My wife and I have 3 children and a great life. I'm also pleased that the woman I once dated got help and eventually married a young widower who had lost his wife to cancer. He had 1 or 2 small children, so she gets to be a mother as she always dreamed. In hindsight, more good has likely come from the breakup than would have come from our union. This has helped me receive adversity and sorrow as potential stepping stones on life's path. Instead of being frozen by despair, experience has taught me to wait for goodness yet unseen. Many years have passed, yet I still love the first woman, not in the same way, and not with the naivete of my early 20s, but with a sincere goodwill toward her wherever she may be. I remain grateful for what we shared. Some mornings when I sit outside, birds land on the table in front of me. After resting for a moment, they fly off and I never see them again. The love one shares with another does not entitle the lover to the beloved, or else love would be a cage. Love is a resting place we offer to others for as long as they need it. It is a table we set for weary wanderers before offering them a sincere farewell. On a lighter note, a few of you asked what kind of soup it was and whether I ate it. For stylistic purposes, I had omitted those details. The fact is, it was beef ramen, and I ate it very sadly. It was not a good look, but one does not waste good soup. To those wondering if, given the chance, I would prefer to be married to the first woman, the answer is no. My wife and I are a much better long-term match, though I could not have known that at the time. Some called my ending self-indulgent fart sniffing, fit for young adult fiction. Since they clearly know the genre, I'll gladly send advance copies of my posts for their expert review. If my expressiveness stirs even a wisp of emotion in these empathetic husks, I would consider it a triumph. After all, to provoke scorn from the emotionally inert is no small feat. Story 18. When I cried about him doing nothing for my birthday or Valentine's Day, he ignored me and watched thirst traps on TikTok as I sobbed next to him in bed. Or when I asked him why he was constantly lying to me, and he replied, "Well, there's no consequences." So I knew it right there that it was over. Okay. Story 19. His hand was around my neck, and he kept going until blackness gathered at the edges of my vision, and I wondered if I would ever see my mom and dad again. When he finally let go and oxygen rushed back into my brain, all I could think was that I could never excuse this. The moment it was safe, I knew I would leave him. Story 20. When he hyped up my birthday present for a month, and it turned out to be a $12 pair of red-framed sunglasses from Target. That's it. Also, when we had been together for 7 years, he asked me if he should make a huge decision. I thought he meant an engagement ring. No, he was subtly asking me if he should cheat on me. Dude was evil. Story 21. I left town for 2 weeks on a trip through the wilderness. I missed her like crazy and kept thinking about how great it would be to see her when I got back. As soon as I returned home, I called her, and the first thing she said was, "Oh wow, I didn't think about you at all." That really hurt, but it was the wake-up call I needed for that terrible relationship. Story 22. I was hit by a distracted driver while we were each traveling over 50 miles per hour. He T-boned me at an angle near the front of my car, causing me to spin across multiple lanes of traffic and go backward into a steep ditch off a major highway. He was listed as my emergency contact, and my iPhone immediately notified him of my potential accident and my location. He texted to ask if I was okay. I said I wasn't sure, explained that I had been hit at high speed, and asked him to come to the scene because I was very upset. He said he had just gone over to his parents' house for a barbecue, and that he'd check in with me later. I had a concussion for 2 weeks and was severely bruised all over. My dad ended up coming, and all my concussed brain could do was keep asking when my partner was going to arrive. My dad said, "Honey, he wouldn't leave a barbecue after you were in a serious car accident. I don't think he's ever coming." I found out 2 months later that he had also been cheating on me for about 8 months. This all happened this year. Sometimes I still can't believe it. We had been together for 3.5 years. Story 23. When my mother took her last breath in front of me, I became extremely distraught. On top of that, I lost my friend group. My family turned into vultures over my mother's estate, and my father pulled shady moves that I am 99% sure were meant to stress my mom and make her decline faster. I poured everything out to my girlfriend at the time, and she told me I was too much to deal with. I did not have to make the choice to leave because she cut herself out of my life. She completely ghosted me while I was struggling to handle all the after-death arrangements, including the funeral. Story 24. There was a lot of cheating during pregnancy, which should have been the moment the penny dropped. But I was deep in a mental health crisis and couldn't see the forest for the trees, let alone evaluate the longevity of my relationship with the father of my child. The real moment of clarity came 10 days postpartum. I was recovering from an emergency C-section after a traumatic 36-hour labor, the most pain I had ever experienced. He was out running errands, and I asked him to grab me a coffee. He told me it was out of his way and that he couldn't. I was shocked. An hour later, he walked in with a gas station coffee, and I thought, oh, he's pulled through. It's not the best coffee, but it's the thought that counts. I was wrong. It was a coffee he purchased for himself. In that moment, I realized I wasn't even really a person to him. He literally did not see my humanity or care for me in the slightest. He said he wanted to marry me, yet he couldn't even get me a coffee that required going 5 minutes out of his way. Story 25. When he proposed, I knew he didn't mean it, and I knew my yes didn't count. We had been together for 6 years, and I was telling him I was unhappy that things had stagnated. It was one of many talks like that, and I was crying. He knelt down and asked me to marry him. I felt like I had to say yes, so I did, but I knew in that moment it wasn't real. We cuddled for a few minutes before I said I didn't think he'd meant it. His response was, well, you kind of forced my hand. The whole thing felt so gross and unfair. Nothing changed after that, and we never talked about the moment again. I broke up with him a few months later. Story 26. He told me he didn't want me to go to a concert for a band we both liked because he was taking his new girlfriend and didn't want there to be any issues. That's how I found out we weren't exclusive. I broke up with him immediately. About 2 years later, we ran into each other randomly. He ended up crying about how unhappy he was with her, how much he missed me, and how, even though they lived together, he slept on the couch. Yeah, sure, bud. Story 27. We had been seeing each other for about 4 months when I mentioned a certain musician. She said, oh my God, I love him. I tried to continue talking about a song he was on, and she stopped me with, no, like I would marry him. I explained that as her boyfriend, that was a dumb and hurtful thing to say. She agreed, apologized, and said she was just a longtime fan. I dropped it. He's famous anyway, who cares? A year later, we moved in together, not because it was ideal, but out of necessity. A few months after that, she mentioned the same musician was doing a concert in a nearby city, about a 30-minute drive, and wanted to go. I'm not a big fan of him, and I'm also not a fan of concerts in general, so I declined but encouraged her to go with friends who were fans. She kind of brushed it off and kept talking about it, then casually mentioned hoping she would get called backstage to do it with him so she could have his kids. I was in shock. She had never talked like that or been that kind of spiteful person. I was also dumbfounded because it seemed like such an odd hill to die on after almost 2 years together. I think my exact words were something like, yeah? Are you messing with me? Or are you just that out of it? That got an even worse response. We broke up, but had to live together for another month or so. Super fun. You live and you learn, I guess. Story 28. When I hit, long story, but it really came to a head after he tackled me in the woods following a fight on my birthday. He convinced me to go home with him and then trapped me in his car, refusing to take me home because he knew I was leaving. I didn't say it, but we both knew. I had to threaten to jump out of a moving vehicle for him to finally take me home. And he made me promise to come into the house with him. I kept that promise, and as I looked at him sitting on the bed, that's when it really hit me. It was over. We actually dated for 1 more month, and it was horrible. He threw the engagement ring at me and punched everything during one of those final fights. Story 29. We dated for 4 years, broke up for a year, and then got back together for a 5th year. During that year, I focused on achieving many of my dreams and gaining more independence. One day, while talking about my accomplishments, I said, I always said I was going to do this. And he replied, I know, but I never thought you'd actually do it. In that moment, I realized we weren't going to stay together. I instinctively understood that he hadn't expected me to chase my dreams, and that was actually why I had broken up with him the first time. Story 30. When the intimacy was gone, I don't just mean being physical. Although he started losing interest in that too, I mean the little touches. A hug or kiss when he came home from work. We had a rule to always kiss each other goodnight, and if I didn't get a hug or kiss during the day, that goodnight kiss was the only physical affection I would receive. I tried to get over it. We have 2 kids, and I understood that sometimes that happens. I tried initiating physical touch and cuddles, but the constant rejection was painful. I think the final moment for me, something that seems so small but ended up being the catalyst, was one night when I asked him for a foot rub. I'd been on my feet all day, and when I finally had a minute to sit down, I was working on an essay outline due the next day, so I was mentally drained. I just wanted a short foot rub. He said, no. I asked why, and he said, because I don't want to. Later, as I was making his lunch for work the next day before going to bed, it hit me how unfair it was. I always tried. I massaged his back when he was sore. I made his lunch every day. I never denied him physical affection. I cooked dinner every night and served the food, and I did all of the cleaning. All I wanted was some affection, just a little, and he wouldn't give that to me. And yes, I had talked to him about these issues many times. I realized that this man who at one point would do anything for me, who thought I'd hung the moon, who treated me like absolute gold, was no longer that man for me. I don't know why. Maybe he thought that because we had kids, he didn't need to maintain the relationship, that she'd never leave me. We have a family. Maybe he wasn't in love with me anymore. Maybe he was cheating. I don't know. And when I asked, he couldn't give me an answer. I didn't want a platonic marriage. I didn't want a roommate. I called off the engagement, and it was the hardest thing I've ever done. We do love each other, and we co-parent well now. We're even friends, but he will never be my husband. Story 31. I had a gut feeling all along, which I overlooked because I loved him, and he really did have many great qualities alongside the issues, but one moment stands out. I told him how unhappy I was with the relationship and his behavior, and 2 days later, he tried to get me to look at engagement rings. That's when I realized he was content with our miserable life and wanted to preserve it, while I wanted to improve it. I also felt like he was trying to buy my silence about the real problems we were having. When we broke up, I told one of his friends who asked that part of the issue was that I couldn't see us getting married while we were so unhappy. I couldn't imagine one more year of that, let alone the rest of our lives. The friend heard it as she broke up with him because he hadn't proposed and tried to get us back together, telling me that X had been planning to propose and telling X that I had been frustrated about waiting for a proposal. Story 32. When we were long distance and hadn't been for the whole relationship, I asked him to come live with me, have a registry office wedding to satisfy our traditional parents, and I could support him for 2 months on my salary since he was in a dead-end job. He said he didn't want to leave his hometown because all his friends were there. I asked if he thought they would stay for him. Anyway, he stayed. It took me another year or two to work it all out and end things. Fast forward a couple more years, we catch up. Not too many hard feelings, and I ask how his friends are. He tells me, yeah, so they all moved away. I gave him the raised eyebrows look. Story 33. He just never really was thoughtful. He always thought he was, but he was quite entitled. The breaking point came one night. I asked him to check on my cats. 3 hours away the night before my dad's emergency brain surgery. My dad had been diagnosed with cancer just 2 days earlier. I was calling him late at night, worried, and it turned out he went out drinking. He didn't get to my place until 4 hours later than I expected. I lost sleep waiting to hear if my cats were okay, having to wake up before 6 the next morning. When he finally called, slurring his words, he told me he'd cleaned a few things, so I shouldn't be mad. I convinced him to take a breathalyzer I keep in my kitchen, well over the legal limit. I had to talk him into taking an Uber because he still wanted to drive. The next day, he saw nothing wrong with what happened. He thought I was overreacting and couldn't care less about what my dad was going through or how stressful it had been for me, especially after signing power of attorney paperwork earlier that day. From that moment on, I never saw him the same way again. Story 34. I knew he was going to propose because we'd talked about it almost as soon as we started dating, about 6 months in. It was his birthday week, and we had a friend of his staying with us in our studio apartment. Before she arrived, he sent me a screenshot of some texts between them about an activity we were planning for later that week. In one of the texts, the friend asked if we'd want any alone time to celebrate, and he said no. I quickly realized he was planning to propose that week and was hurt that he didn't care about being intimate afterward. I didn't say anything because I didn't want to ruin the surprise. We had a dead bedroom almost immediately after getting engaged. It took me another 1.5 years to grow the courage to leave him. And no, he wasn't cheating with the friend. It would have been 1,000,000 times easier to leave if he had been. Oh, and the night before he proposed, he kept me up until 2 a.m., ranting about men's rights. Story 35. We were doing a diving course, and at the point where we had to check each other's rigs, he kind of mindlessly pushed me to turn. Because the rig was heavy, I really noticed how focused he was on his own performance, acting out the role of safety officer rather than actually being safe. I realized he wanted to perform a version of himself that he saw as manly and competent, but he wasn't truly interested in being competent. He was still a little boy, and he always would be. 25 years later, we caught up, and he's a frozen person, still a little boy pretending to be an adult. Now it's also very obvious he's a coward. I wonder if the two are connected. Story 36. A week after I bought an engagement ring, my boyfriend's mom decided to meet me for the first time. This was a huge step for her, as she struggled with anxiety and with the gay thing. I was honestly thrilled to meet her, and we hit it off instantly. However, at the end of our conversation, her face turned serious, and she asked me why I was allowing her son to drink when I knew he had a problem with alcohol. It took me a moment to reply, because in that instant, everything confusing about our relationship became crystal clear. Suddenly, I understood why we'd been partying so much, why he had been acting so strangely, and where all his money was going. What followed was a painful 6 months of trying to keep a doomed relationship afloat. It's hard to walk away from someone you love because of something they can't fully control. But ultimately, I wasn't the person who could save him from his own addiction. The day I ended it was quiet. There was no argument. Those had come and gone. We were both in bed, exhausted, scared and sad, because we both knew he had drowned us. We held hands and stared at our apartment ceiling as if it were our coffin. And that was the day I learned that Zales will reconsider their return policy if you cry hard enough. Story 37. Ex-fiancé. Thankfully, we never tied the knot or did any of the announcement things. We'd been in a rough patch for a long time, and I discovered he was dealing with a paranoid break, but refused all treatment or even to acknowledge it. I then realized he had proposed to me solely as a tool to keep me with him. He routinely used it to make me feel isolated. I want my family to actually be excited when I tell them who I'm going to marry, to make me feel guilty for thinking about leaving, and to manipulate my dreams and expectations for the future. He even pushed me to go to work while awaiting COVID results, knowing I was symptomatic, and worked in an old folks home, which caused a massive COVID shutdown and multiple deaths. Also, he could be home alone to FaceTime an ex. He treated my animals poorly too, and I'm still mad at myself for letting him. My final straw came when the dog we got together stood between my legs and growled at him during a fight as he approached me. She had never been his fan, but she was always sweet and loving. Seeing her turn into my protector was the eye-opener. I realized how miserable I'd be with him, and I left that night. Story 38. When he told me he was no longer attracted to me because of my weight gain, it was devastating. Because he's autistic, he didn't approach it well, though I'm not sure any approach could have been acceptable, and used words like disgusting and lazy. He wanted to stay together and for me to work on my weight, but I couldn't stay with someone who valued physical appearance that much, especially since I had been bigger than this when we had dated in the past. Other early warning signs included him refusing to get tested for sleep apnea for months, despite his snoring causing me serious sleep deprivation, and then refusing to wear the CPAP mask more than twice after being diagnosed. The icing on the cake was when he asked me to cover the cost of the CPAP after we split, claiming he only bought it for me. Story 39. 7 hours before I had a big test, she wanted to argue. There was no not arguing with her. If you stayed quiet, she kept going. If you disagreed, she kept going. If you took her side, you were lying. 2 hours into the fight, I tried to ignore her and go to bed. She told me to admit we were through. Might this be a way out? I said yes. She started questioning if I was serious, so I laid it out. Yes, we're done. I'm sick of this. We are done. We're over. You're moving. We're done. Now go pretend to sleep on the couch for 15 minutes before coming back in here and yelling more about how I didn't come rescue you from the couch. Yes, I know you that well, and I'm sick of all your BS. Go sleep in your friggin' car. I don't care. We are 100% done. I'm going to sleep before you ruin my final tomorrow. We are done. Edit. I could insert a classic screw you Karen type comment, but I won't. My ex had many legitimate problems that I hope she was able to work on. Maybe she learned something from losing me. Story 40. There were so many instances I overlooked. Her threatening to slash my tires because she thought I was cheating, stalking me to verify I wasn't, choosing me over her 4 kids, refusing to help her youngest with school and instead bullying him, being with me only for the money, attempted assault on my best friend out of jealousy, gaslighting. The list goes on. Each of these chipped away at me a little at a time, some more than others. The order I've listed them isn't chronological, but they all happened. As for why I stayed, utter horniness, loneliness, and it being my first relationship, I didn't really know what a healthy relationship looked like, so I was blind to a lot of it. I'm in a healthy relationship now, even got engaged, and when I look back, I am in utter disbelief that I let it go on that long. Story 41. I had a huge puppy love, an infatuation with a guy I met in college. I really thought he was the one. We dated off and on for a year, and I thought he was a really great guy. The first huge red flag came when he asked me to try doing essay stuff in bed. I'm not shaming his thing, and I didn't think differently of him for asking. But I told him I had been essayed years ago. Not that it matters, but it was by a stranger when I was walking home from a friend's house, and that would likely be very triggering for me. He got mad and said, "Oh, now I have to suffer because you are damaged," and then went on to say, "It's your fault that happened anyways because of the people you hang out with." That last comment was because he hated my female friends, whom I had known since childhood. The second huge red flag was that he would get mad and start an argument if I didn't answer his calls for any reason. He told me it was inappropriate for a woman in a relationship to go out to bars, clubs, or events with friends. I was 22 years old and still went out with my friends often, and I refused to stop just because he wanted me to. Eventually, I broke up with him for the final time, and he ended up stalking me for years. He would break into my house and leave love notes in random places. He would wait outside my apartment, hiding in different spots so he could watch me come and go and see who came over. A few months after our breakup, he moved out of state with another girl he had just started dating. I thought the stalking would end. Nope, He became a police officer and would email me every time my boyfriend at the time got a new car, a new job, or a new address. No context in the emails, just copied and pasted updates. He was married by this time too. He eventually stopped when I threatened to report his emails to the sheriff's office he was working at. He was a highly respected officer, earning awards and recognition, and his specialty was S-crimes, which is, frankly, super yikes. Story 42. We were at a market in a foreign country when I spotted a pair of pants I really liked. I went in to try them on and came out to find him and see what he thought. He wasn't anywhere nearby, so I went back in to change and then went to look for him. He was just outside the market stall, chatting up another tourist, flirting. I joined them, but they both acted like I didn't even exist. I knew then that it was totally over. It wasn't new to see him flirting openly with other women, but this time it struck me how badly he made me feel and how completely unimportant my feelings were to him. Story 43. I was made redundant at my job when I was 2 months away from my ILR permanent residency in the UK. Getting a new job at another company was nearly impossible. It wasn't a matter of my skills or qualifications. I have a PhD from a US Ivy League school and was a straight A student, but if any European applied for the same job, they would get it regardless of their qualifications or experience. I was trying for internal positions within the company that had made me redundant and was going to an interview for a role I really wanted. In a moment of desperation, I called my ex and asked if, in case I didn't get the job, she would be willing to marry me so I could switch onto her visa. I know it was a last-ditch attempt. I didn't actually want to get married that way, but I guess my nerves and the desperation of the situation made me reach out. She said no, flat out. I ended up getting 2 offers from within the company, including the job I wanted. I took a week off after that and went on a solo car trip in southern England, visiting all the places I had wanted to see for the past 5 years but couldn't, because we were saving to pay off her government mortgage loan from the first-time buyer scheme. She wanted to come along and seemed surprised, maybe even hurt when I refused. That was the beginning of the end. Things were never the same after that. I had moved continents for her, taken a salary cut, and possibly sabotaged my career. All she had to do was be there for me just once. It absolutely broke my heart. Story 44. She couldn't admit fault for the smallest things and interpreted my frustration as if I thought she was stupid or clumsy. It was always, the toast burned. Who put the toast in the toaster? Or, the ex fell. Who knocked it over by not looking where they were going? I don't care about small mistakes like that, and it doesn't affect my opinion of someone until they can't just say, oops, I did that, and move on. Because if someone won't admit fault in low-stakes situations, can you trust them to act fairly when it really matters? Story 45. We had just started dating, though we had known each other for a while. I usually let him do most of the talking, but he asked me a serious question about my past. I was in the middle of answering, really feeling it, eyes full of tears, when he suddenly interrupted with, "You know, I promised X I would come over to his house." I'm sure my face showed my astonishment, because he quickly added, "Oh, did you want to finish what you were saying first?" I said, "No, I'm good. You go on and see your friend." I knew right then that he would never be there for me emotionally, and I immediately friend-zoned him. He couldn't understand why I wasn't into him romantically after that, but in one sentence, he killed a big crush I had had for months. Story 46. My brother was walking home, high on something, when a dog started following him. He thought feeding it would make it go away. It didn't. He called me to help him. I'm a 5-foot woman, and my ex was 6 foot. At the time, he was living with me. We got out of bed, I went out, and he stayed back, closing the door behind me, something I wasn't expecting at all. I went downstairs by myself to see where my brother was, and then my brother ran upstairs, and they locked me outside. That was the moment I fell out of love with him. Me and my brother aren't close either. He's a massive piece of crap, and honestly, I wish that dog had torn him up. It would have saved me a lot of future heartbreak. Story 47. I have a few stories from one relationship. It took me a while to leave, but I'm relieved I finally did. 1. The idea of moving in together was something I wouldn't entertain, even after 2 years. He didn't know how to cook and was messy, and I knew I'd end up bitter and resentful taking care of the household on my own. 2. I got an opportunity to go to France with 2 of my best friends, a lifelong dream of mine. Instead of being happy for me, he sulked and went non-verbal whenever I brought it up. He was invited to come but said he was too broke, despite always having money for beer, takeout, and new gaming stuff. The day I left, he made me cry and drove home, so I had to call my dad to get a ride to the airport, simply because he didn't want to do it. Travel is a huge passion of mine, and I realized then that this was likely going to be the thing that ended our relationship. 3. The final straw came a few months later, when my mother paid to fly us out to see her across the country. I thought maybe if he traveled, he'd catch the travel bug too. He was miserable the entire flight, didn't want to do anything while we were there, and refused to eat anything my mom cooked. instead sneaking out to buy fast food. Finally, he jokingly told my aunt to F off in front of me, my mother, and my cousins. Yeah, it was a mess. Looking back, there were so many red flags, even at the beginning, that I ignored because I had low self-esteem and was lonely. Thankfully, I'm in a much better place now, with a kind and loving partner who shares my passion for travel and even cooks me breakfast whenever I sleep over. Story 48. When I had a miscarriage following an unplanned pregnancy, he said most of the right things in private, but still pretended we weren't seeing each other around. Mutual friends and coworkers. It broke my heart, but it also made me realize that if I ever got pregnant again, I wanted it to be on purpose with someone who would be over the moon to be the father of my child. A couple of months later, I met the man I would go on to marry. It was just the two of us for 10 years, through amazing adventures and some harrowing challenges, but always together. After 8 years of infertility, we finally got our positive test, and he was just as excited as I was. Our son is almost 3 now, and my husband is a wonderful dad. Story 49. After I had surgery to remove part of my cervix due to early signs of cancer, he picked me up from the hospital complaining the whole time. Instead of taking me straight home to rest as I was still groggy, bleeding, and sore, he decided it was an excellent time to go furniture shopping. He bought a few large items, and when we finally got home, he demanded I help unload them and bring them inside. When I explained I couldn't lift anything because I had just had surgery and couldn't bear down like that, he started screaming at me about how lazy I was and how I never do anything for him. I realized then that this man would never help me through pregnancy, childbirth, or the challenges that come afterward. Leaving him was the best decision I ever made. Story 50. After 4 years of dating, I finally accepted what I had suspected by 3 months in and known for certain by 2 years in, the inescapable truth. She was a constitutionally dishonest person. No matter how wonderful she was in other ways, I could never truly know or trust her. I would never have a real partnership with her. She would always come first as far as she was concerned. The whole in sickness and in health? Never going to happen. Word to the wise, people lie. It's not a big deal depending on the nature and frequency, but someone who is fundamentally dishonest is incapable of admitting fault or sincerely apologizing. That person should never ever be married. The self-righteous and sadistic way she treated me and my family after I broke up with her was, I'm sure to her dismay, totally validating for me, totally cathartic. It turns out that all along she was just a bish. Story 51. One story that comes to mind involves someone else. When my wife was pregnant with our first son, we were going to birthing classes. One guy in the room told his wife that if she went into labor on Super Bowl Sunday, she was on her own. She needed to find someone else to take her to the hospital, and he would only get there after the Super Bowl was over and the guests had gone home. I was like, what the hell? I talked with the wife afterwards, and she told me the due date was indeed Super Bowl Sunday. When the midwife informed them of that, he absolutely flipped out and went on a tirade in the room, saying it was his day and the baby better not even think about coming that day. He also said that if the baby was born before the Super Bowl, she would need to take the baby somewhere on Super Bowl Sunday so they wouldn't be in the house and disturb the game. She was not happy about any of it, but I guess once you're married and pregnant, it's kind of hard to just walk away from the relationship. I never found out what happened to them. Story 52. I knew it was over when I found out he was paying S-workers online for personalized content right before our wedding. Trust was already shaken because of his behavior and attention-seeking on social media. When I got upset, he told me I was overweight and unattractive, despite having gained 20 pounds during COVID while working non-stop at a hospital and completing my doctorate. I almost married someone who would have left me in a dead bedroom, using me for financial and emotional security while living a whole intimate life outside of me. Story 53. Her anxiety was bad, but a terrible roommate situation made it 10 times worse. For months, I supported her through tears and breakdowns, until she finally found a new place. It was with friends, cheaper yet bigger, in a much nicer area with great restaurants and parks nearby. It was exciting. On moving day, I was pumped. We drove while I chatted about plans where we'd get food, maybe a walk to settle in and explore the neighborhood. But she was completely silent. She insisted she was fine, but after a while we drove in silence. Suddenly, she broke down crying, saying she was overwhelmed. That was the exact moment I realized we had to break up. We'd finally gotten through those awful months and landed in the best possible scenario, yet she was still an anxious wreck. I realized things were never going to get better. There would always be something for her to be upset about. She needed a therapist, not a boyfriend. I don't know if she ever got help though. The breakup was mutual and we left on good terms, but she blocked me on social media not long after. When I took her to Paris, she cried at least once each day we were there. I sat down with her afterwards and suggested she might have a problem, but she was dismissive and didn't seem to think it was abnormal. I just hope she didn't jump into another relationship. Not out of jealousy, but because she simply wasn't in a good place for one. She obviously had the worst of it, but my own mental health took a nosedive while I was with her. I just wasn't equipped for it. She was a lovely person, and I hope she gets help at some point. Story 54. I was going on a week-long work trip and realized I was booking my dog into daycare, even though he would be home. It wasn't that he wouldn't say he'd take care of her. It was that I didn't trust him to actually walk her regularly and give her needed medications. If I couldn't trust him to care for my dog for a week, how could I build a future with him? How could I trust him as my next of kin, responsible for medical decisions and caring for me if the worst happened? We parted ways a few months later when the lease ended. Story 55. He kept telling me the same story over and over about seeing our boss in a bathrobe and noticing between her legs because she had crossed them. Honestly, I didn't care, but he told it again and again. Then he had the audacity to start making fun of me because I reacted with annoyance at hearing the exact same story repeatedly. He tried to make me believe I had a jealousy problem. I didn't. I just didn't want to hear every day about him seeing our shared boss in that way. That should be reasonable. That's when I said, nope, this is not my future. He was only toying with me. It's still wild how he thought he could manipulate me into thinking I was jealous. What would he even gain from that besides drama? I don't get it. Story 56. He convinced me to leave my job and support network in a semi-urban area to move in with him in a small town 20 miles from the Canadian border and work in his family's restaurant, only to dump me a week after I arrived. 3 days later, he brought a 20-year-old home to spend the night and even invited me to third wheel on their date. 4 days after his sleepover, he decided he wanted to get back together. But within a week, I caught him messaging other women on Snapchat. Story 57. When he lost his job and 2 years later, I started marking a dot on the calendar every time he went to the casino while I was at work. The fact that I even felt the need to do it was telling. But when I showed him, he flat out denied how often he was going. He was going 3 to 4 times a week, and I later found out he was thousands of dollars in debt. I was out of there. Story 58. I'm a lifelong aviation enthusiast with a soft spot for the Boeing B-29 Superfortress. Every aviation nerd has one aircraft that just speaks to them, and the B-29 is mine. It has been since childhood. Last year, I finally had enough money to purchase a flight in the cockpit of Doc, one of only 2 B-29s still flying today. The other is Fifi, for those curious. I asked her to join me. It was going to be the biggest day of my life. Not only would I get to climb inside and explore an actual B-29, but I'd also be in her cockpit. She said, "I'm not interested in going. Have fun though." It stung because no matter how bored she might have been, this was a monumental moment in my life, and I wanted her there with me. I had gone to hundreds of casinos with her, even though I don't gamble, and I had gone out of my way to make her feel loved and adored. It was right then that I knew the relationship was doomed. She left me the day I graduated college a few months later, on the night our families were supposed to meet for the first time to have dinner together and celebrate me. Story 59. I was on edge every time he made a commitment to me. I knew he would change plans, cancel, reschedule, plan something before or after, something. And then if I felt anything about it, a fight would ensue. And I was made out to be the problem for being inflexible, even though it had been his idea. At first, it was small things, and I thought, who cares if minor plans shift to fit his schedule? Then it became bigger things. But there was always a reason, and I didn't want to be difficult over a miscommunication. Then it was important things once or twice where I stood my ground. Eventually, it became everything. And then he accused me of constantly testing his commitment. Date night? Nah, let's go out with friends. Support you after surgery? Oh, I'm going to grab dinner with friends, but I was planning to come by first. What's the big deal? How could I know? That weekend getaway I planned for your birthday? I know it's a week away now, but I swear I was about to look at places. Why does everything have to be on your schedule? Plans after I've been out of town for a week? Oh, it turns out my friend is visiting. Let's meet up with him. This man wants to be a father. I can't even imagine. Hello, single parenthood. I miss him and feel sad, but I had more energy and felt like myself again within a week of breaking up. Story 60. When he would message a girl who had friend-zoned him almost every day, he would badmouth me and compare me to her. He told me about an intimate experience they had 8 years ago and even showed me videos of her working out. She had a boyfriend, lived in another state, had rejected him completely, and I had never even met her. My ex publicly announced that he planned to marry me, but privately it was a nightmare. I was constantly devalued, mocked, and compared to women he had absolutely no chance with, not just her. When I finally ended things, he became extremely bitter and violent. It felt like his goal had been to destroy my self-esteem and keep me under his control. An absolutely rancid experience. Story 61. When I realized I would be taking on 2 children to raise, the man-child and his young daughter, everything became clear. After his daughter's birthday celebrations, he initiated a conversation where he said he was glad my children were grown because he didn't want to raise another man's children, yet he fully expected help raising his own. That was the final straw, coming after a long pattern of selfish and immature behavior from a grown man who preferred being mothered over having a real romantic relationship. After begging to know what he needed to change to save the relationship, he shifted to petty comparisons and derogatory remarks, telling me I didn't measure up to his mother or his ex, and insisting I would never find anyone better than him. Story 62. When her brother called me white trash and her parents laughed in agreement, everything changed. I was in grad school at the time, but because my parents hadn't attended college, I was considered trash in their eyes. My father had left school to serve in the Navy during World War II, and my mother worked as a civilian for the Navy. He later built a very successful business, sold it, and retired to California. Years later, her parents were both convicted of stealing from their company's 401k. Karma, I guess. The relationship ended very shortly after that moment of laughter. Story 63. When I realized that not only was I miserable with him, but that staying would guarantee nothing but more misery, everything became clear. The person I thought I fell in love with was either long gone or had never really existed. I caught myself wishing for some obvious breaking point just so I could finally walk away, and then remembered I didn't need anything dramatic to leave. I could choose to go at any time. So I told him I couldn't do it anymore. The constant fighting, the non-stop unhappiness, and the fact that the only time I felt okay was when he wasn't around. I told him, have a nice life, because I'm done. He chased after me, trying to get me to change my mind, but I stayed firm. I reminded him that if he truly believed I was as awful as he claimed, then there was no reason for us to be together. He responded by saying that if I ever came crawling back, he wouldn't take me back. Not long after, my coworkers had to call the police to get him to finally leave me alone. Story 64. He blew me off for weeks with scattered phone calls that never lasted longer than 5 minutes, even though we were in a long-distance relationship. He was online and wouldn't talk to me, yet he was happily chatting with his friends. Then he disappeared from the internet for a week, sent me a few messages about being depressed, which I could understand, but it still sent me into a panic, and then blew me off again to take his mother out. I could even hear her in the background telling him not to ignore me. He had promised to visit me in my country, but he wouldn't get a job to save money for the trip or even get a passport. Meanwhile, I had visited him multiple times and worked my arse off to save for every flight. He still had the nerve to wonder why we broke up. Story 65. When she threw a tantrum over my photography skills. We were on a trip together, and we spent at least 15 minutes at a single spot because she kept finding things wrong with the photo she asked me to take. The angle's not right. The lighting looks wrong. My face is too blurry. You're making me look fat. Meanwhile, I was holding her purse and all of her things while trying to figure out the unfamiliar phone she insisted I use instead of mine. Eventually, she got so frustrated and angry that she slapped me across the face and told me she wished I would off myself. She has some past trauma, so I often make excuses for her behavior. But when I told this story to a friend, he half-jokingly said, "Wow, does your girlfriend even like you?" That's when it hit me. Does she? Story 66. When she told me how much she missed me while I was away on a family holiday, she laid it on so thick that she wanted me to come over the moment I got back. She knew the exact day and time I was returning and told me how excited she was. I went to see her, and she wasn't home. She spent the entire night out with friends and over the phone asked, "Can't you just wait outside until I'm back later?" The worst part is that I stayed, even after she directly told me she didn't love me. I guess I was scared to be alone. It turned out she had been cheating on me for the last 6 months and ended up pregnant with the new guy's twins. I'm now happily married 15 years later, but I still cringe when I think about how I didn't stand up for myself. I also struggle with the fear that my wife might one day tell me she doesn't love me. I'm in therapy now, trying to work through it. Story 67. When we first met, she was a bit larger than her profile pictures showed. We spent around 3 to 4 months hanging out over Xbox Live on her end and PC or PlayStation for me before becoming official. I genuinely wanted to fall in love with her. I tried, but about 3 months into the relationship, I finally understood why I couldn't. We were volunteering one day, and on the way back to the car, I was walking quickly like I normally do. She grabbed my arm and asked me to slow down because she was struggling to keep up and was sweating. The smell lingered in my car and later on my couch. She also experienced frequent heat flashes, even though she was only 32. She weighed over 300 pounds and lived a largely sedentary lifestyle. She worked from home, homeschooled her 8-year-old daughter, and spent much of the evening on the couch eating snacks. She was very self-conscious about her stomach, but wasn't willing to take semi-regular walks around the neighborhood, which was beautiful and affluent. Late in October, she told me she thought she loved me. I liked her, but I didn't love her. Worse, I realized I couldn't see myself marrying someone I wasn't physically attracted to. My lack of attraction was tied to her weight. We were 99% compatible. Same personality, same likes and dislikes, same hobbies, mutual respect. I could always make her laugh and make her feel safe. But I realized I couldn't overlook the differences in our lifestyles. I enjoy nature, hiking, swimming, sailing, exploring new places, and walking. Most of her time was spent sitting, cuddling, crocheting, or watching TV. I could accept her being tied to her daughter, but her sedentary lifestyle and health habits made it impossible for me to see a future marrying her. Story 68. When I found out he had a son, he was court-ordered to pay child support for. I was shocked. Don't get me wrong, he absolutely should have been paying. What bothered me most was that he had to be forced by the court. His son was 4 at the time, and he had met him only once. I begged him to reconsider and be more involved, but he said it was too traumatic and seemed comfortable being a deadbeat dad. And yet he still wanted to have kids with me, just not this particular child. That's when I lost all respect for him. The relationship went on for a while, but I knew I couldn't build a family with him after that. Someone else did though. He's a loving, doting father these days, constantly posting pictures of his daughter and sharing how much he loves her. No one knows he has a son. He chooses not to publicly acknowledge. I still check in on his son online from time to time. He's 19 now, and his mother seems to have done an excellent job raising him. Story 69. I gave up everything for him, my job, my friends, my home, and went through another difficult pregnancy despite the risks. He wouldn't help me with the baby, lied about going to work, and instead spent his time and money on alcohol and other women. I thought that if I did more, he would care. I cooked, cleaned, did all the shopping, woke him with breakfast in bed, gave massages, anything I could think of to show love and appreciation. Nothing changed. When I finally broke down, crying and begging for help, he just laughed and stepped over me to get another beer from the fridge. That's when I realized that wasn't love. I needed to do better for myself and my kids. Story 70. When I was in the hospital with sepsis, he didn't take time off work, even though his job easily would have allowed it, and he had a month's worth of PTO. He acted inconvenienced when he brought me a phone charger and spent more time complaining about making me a care package than actually being there, visiting for barely an hour. The next day, while I was still recovering in the hospital, he was on a work trip and called me to find his location on Google Maps, then yelled about traffic and getting lost. Afterwards, fights escalated and became physical. The fight where I genuinely feared for my life was the day I stopped loving him and finally got out. Story 71. When she starved herself and stayed in bed while I was at work because she didn't feel like eating the breakfast and lunch I had prepared for her. When she said she wouldn't do any house chores while living with me and not working, claiming she wanted to enjoy her life finally and not become a wife and pick up after someone, right after I had put her through university. When she woke me up at 4 a.m. to pour her water and feed her while she was gaming, saying she had an important raid, even though I was sleep deprived from working overtime all week, and had work at 7 a.m. When she started planning which rest home to put my parents in, how her parents would stay with us until they passed, and even how my parents should spend their money and give us their inheritance early. Yeah, I stayed far too long. The funny thing is, she broke up with me and blamed me for not begging her to stay, then pleaded to get back together after she realized I was actually done. Story 72. I finally reached a point of total exhaustion from constantly trying to prove I hadn't cheated, even though I never had and never wanted to. He controlled my every move so completely that I rarely left the house for fear of being accused. I couldn't even go to the laundromat, the grocery store, or have coffee with my middle-aged neighbor without him flying off the handle, claiming it was all designed so I could cheat. The moment I realized he had drained every ounce of love I had for him came during yet another fight. This time because I had gone to get the mail. A thought popped into my head. If I was going to be accused of cheating for 7 years straight while being innocent, maybe I should just finally do it. Right then, I made up my mind that we were done. I never cheated, but he nearly drove me to it. Story 73. It was my birthday. I had made it very clear that I wanted to celebrate it after going several years without doing so. I told him I'd at least like to go out for dinner, but he said he was too busy. My friend arranged a small last-minute birthday dinner, and I had to beg him to come. He showed up late. When the bill arrived, he didn't even reach for his wallet. I ended up paying for his meal and drinks. I was upset for a few days, and when he asked why, I told him I was hurt that he had never gotten me a cake, gift, or card. The next day, he bought a boxed cake mix from the dollar store and gave it to me so you'll stop complaining. I had to make the cake myself, and it didn't even have icing. Oh, and the night before my birthday, he went out for poker with the boys, so he clearly had time to plan something. He just chose not to. I've never felt more free than I have since leaving him. Story 74. It was his sister's birthday, and the party was at his parents' house. They lived quite far away, so I drove 1.5 hours to get there. I arrived at 7, helped set up, and even helped his sister get ready. I really stepped up. Then the party started, and I realized no one was talking to me. I stood in a corner with my drink, watching cars pass outside. His parents and he were deep in a lively conversation with his best friend, a woman. Yes, yikes. And his sister was busy with her friends, which made sense, but no one acknowledged me. I left at 9. No one asked why I was going so early. My partner didn't say a word. That's when I realized I would never fit into his life, and that I didn't want to be connected to that family forever. His parents were deeply unpleasant, and I remember thinking I would rather die single than marry him and have his mother as my mother-in-law. The relationship spiraled shortly after that, and I've been living my best life ever since. Story 75. He never really stood up for me, but what finally did it was the night a mutual friend of ours, a really tall big guy, got drunk and completely lost it. He started screaming, saying awful things about me, and even punched the wall. I was hiding upstairs, but I could still hear most of what was happening. My now ex-boyfriend didn't disagree with him or ask him to stop saying those things about me, not once. And while I understood he was trying to keep the friend calm, the fact that he never defended me made me feel emotionally unsafe and unimportant. When we talked about it later, he outright denied that the friend had mostly been yelling about me. We stayed together for a while after that, but I think that was the moment I started to truly internalize how little I mattered to him. It made me pay attention to all the other behaviors, ones I had previously ignored, that carried the same message. That incident made the emotional misalignment and lack of validation in our relationship painfully clear. Story 76. This thread brought out all the things my ex-husband did to me that I never fully noticed at the time. 14 years, and I'm glad I got out of it. But the brain rewiring was tough. I'm starting all over again because he doesn't pay child support or alimony. He wrecked my credit score. He isolated me from friends, and he didn't let me work. He won in court because he hired a really good, expensive lawyer. I'm struggling financially and mentally, but I feel happier. He still torments me by using my kids, but I have hope. I'm glad most people in this thread figured things out before they got married. I'm very happy and proud of you all. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.